When the iPhone 13 Pro Max was announced, I was thinking the same thing you probably were. This isn't much of an upgrade. It's an S here. I don't need to upgrade to this phone. But most people upgrading to the 13 aren't coming from the iPhone 12. They're coming from previous generations. I personally am upgrading from an iPhone 10 or X, depending on what camp you're in. And that's the thing about phone upgrades nowadays. There's never really a standout feature that really warrants a year-on-year upgrade. There are a ton of little iterative updates that over time add up to a big update so that when you do decide to upgrade, you get the amalgamation of all those little updates. So what is new on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and does it warrant an upgrade? There are three main upgrades this year: the screen, the battery, and the cameras. Let's start with the body. It's slightly thicker to accommodate a physically larger battery. Nice. The notch is 20% smaller because they've moved the earpiece to the top of the phone. Alright, but the most notable physical change is the size of the camera system. This thing is massive, but we'll get to that shortly. It also still features the Lightning port. Now I know some of you asked me about how big and heavy this phone is in everyday use. It's definitely a big and heavy phone. You're going to notice it. There's no way around that. You're going to feel that weight while you're holding it. I have some pants and shorts that I can't wear anymore because this phone will not fit inside of the small pockets. Thankfully, most of my bottoms have big ass pockets to actually accommodate this phone, so I'm not worried about that. But I have always loved big phones. When the iPhone 6 Plus came out, I bought that thing so fast because that's what I've always wanted in an iPhone. I was looking at the Galaxy Note series and I was like, I want that, but in iPhone form. And the iPhone 6 Plus was the first phone to have a big version, and I loved it. And because of that, I just always loved big phones. And now with this phone, it's the perfect phone for me. But for a lot of people, the iPhone 13 Pro Max is going to be too big and too heavy. And if you're on the fence debating whether or not you want the big phone, I'd recommend going for the regular 13 Pro because there's no difference in performance or cameras this year, it's just the screen size. So if you don't know which is right for you, get the regular 13 Pro because it's going to fit your life much easier. But if you're about that phablet life like I am, you're gonna love this phone. Otherwise, this phone looks almost identical to the previous generation. You're not going to be able to flex to strangers passing by that you have the new phone just by glancing at it. But honestly, I really like the design of this phone. We don't need a crazy redesign year on year if the design is good, and I like it, it works. Sure, it would have been nice getting an upgraded Face ID for when you're wearing masks, or an in-screen fingerprint scanner, or just completely getting rid of the notch. But what we got works fine. And the upgrades that Apple did make are bigger than you think. The physically larger battery and the ultra-efficient and powerful A15 Bionic chip lead to some incredibly long battery life. Apple claims 2.5 hours more than the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Since I didn't have the previous generation, I can't corroborate that claim, but what I can say is that the battery life on this thing is absolutely insane. I was finishing days with 30 to 50% left on this phone, and that's mind-blowing to me. And I use my phone a lot, joining long Twitter spaces, scrolling through social media, responding to texts and emails, watching YouTube, as well as shooting 4K video and raw photos. I use this phone quite a bit. I'm usually getting 5 to 8 hours of screen on time and finishing the day with a healthy amount of battery life. That is incredible. This phone is the battery life and productivity king. It will most definitely get you through a full day of heavy use, and depending on your use, you could even go 2 or more days on a single charge. That's pretty impressive. There's another feature that factors into this incredibly long battery life, and that is the new screen. We're finally getting ProMotion on an iPhone. I immediately noticed this 120Hz refresh rate when I turned the phone on. We're gonna swipe up. Oh, what? All right, hold up. That 120Hz display, you can already see it just in the setup menu. Oh, it looks real good. I could instantly tell the difference with the higher refresh rate. Scrolling and going through the UI just felt so snappy. And the wonderful thing about this is that it's a variable refresh rate, so you're getting that 120Hz when it matters, when you're scrolling, when you're going through the UI, but it also automatically dials down to 10Hz to save you a ton of battery life when you don't need it. This is why it took so long for Apple to bring high refresh rates to the iPhone, because they wanted to do it right. They weren't sacrificing battery life or resolution, and now we get the best of both worlds. So while I absolutely love this 120Hz display, being the tech nerd that I am, I also haven't been broken by it to the point that I could never look at another 60Hz screen. I'm currently using my iPad mini as well as my MacBook Pro 16-inch, which are both 60Hz displays, and while I can tell that they're not 120Hz, I'm not disgusted using them. It's nice, and I greatly appreciate that high refresh rate screen on the iPhone, but it's kind of something that just happens in the background that makes your phone feel a lot faster. Games and other apps that would actually utilize and benefit from a 120Hz display haven't been updated to support it yet. I have let other people play with this brand new iPhone because I was curious to see if they could notice the difference, and most of them couldn't. It's not something that's immediately noticeable to most people. The people I handed my phone to said that the phone felt faster, but they thought that was because of the new processor, not because of the 120Hz display. So it's very interesting to see how the vast majority of people aren't actually going to be able to tell that they have a brand new high refresh rate display in this phone. What I think will happen is that as more people get accustomed to the 120Hz display, they will be able to realize it and not go back to a 60Hz display. But if you're comparing it right off the bat, most people aren't going to tell. This screen is a bright and beautiful LTPO OLED, getting up to 1200 nits peak brightness. That is absolutely insane that we're above the threshold for HDR on a phone. Something like that in a camera monitor would cost thousands of dollars. Just like the last iPhone, this iPhone is 5G capable, with millimeter wave still being exclusively locked to US models. This is something that's nice, but the infrastructure isn't really there yet to support it, so it's just kind of future-proofing your phone for when the infrastructure is there to support it. This phone now features up to a whopping 1 terabyte configuration. I personally got the 512GB version because I don't need a terabyte yet, and if the rumors are true about the iPhone 14, I might need to do a year-on-year upgrade. Now, the biggest update to this phone by far is the camera system. There's a lot going on here. The camera system as a whole is significantly larger, taking up a huge portion of the backside of the phone. The sensors are larger, the lenses are larger with a wider aperture, there's optical image stabilization as well as sensor shift, which is just crazy. The telephoto lens is now a 77mm full frame equivalent, whereas the ultra wide and wide are 13 and 26mm respectively. In my tests, all three cameras work really well, with my favorite being the wide and the ultra wide. The wide angle lens is still the best performing of the three, but it's really nice having the other two specialty lenses. The ultra wide got a big upgrade. You're now able to focus, it's significantly better in low light, and it has macro capabilities. The phone will automatically switch into macro mode when it detects that you're getting close to an object, but it's kind of frustrating. I found that in video mode, it doesn't automatically switch, and then in photo mode, it's kind of finicky. There are times where I want to take a close-up but non-macro photo, and I can't because the phone just automatically switches and I have no control over that. However, Apple is said to be working on an update to fix this problem, so we'll probably be able to toggle it on and off in a future update. I love that. More manual control is always better. All three cameras are still 12 megapixels, which is fine for most people. What that means for photos is that you can't really zoom in or crop your photos without looking blurry or mushy. What that means for video is that you're still limited to 4K as the highest resolution possible, because with 5, 6, 8K, you need a higher megapixel count to actually shoot at that resolution. That might be something we see on the iPhone 14, but for now, the iPhone 13 cameras are absolutely incredible. I shot an entire video on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, mostly in 4K 60, and it looked incredible. You can check out that video if you want to see just how good these cameras are in a real world situation. I shot everything handheld and I was amazed by the stabilization. It looked like I was using a gimbal. And because the sensors this year are physically larger, not only are you letting in more light, but you're also getting in more natural depth of field. And speaking of depth of field, the headline feature that grabbed everyone's attention, cinematic mode. I initially was very skeptical about this, but after using it, I was very impressed. In ideal situations, viewing it on a small screen, it's passable as a professional camera. I've shown this footage to a couple non-creative friends and they thought that I'd shot that on my professional mirrorless camera. Now, it's definitely not perfect. Even in ideal situations, there's still a lot of haloing and poor edge detection going on. The blur around the person can look fake, or it can just completely miss the face and blur the ears or nose when it's not supposed to. And it definitely needs a lot of light and for you to be the perfect distance away from your subject. Too close or too far, and it won't engage. Not enough light, and it won't engage. And on top of that, it's limited to 1080p at 30 frames per second. I did find, however, that it upscales pretty nicely. I mixed it in with my 4K footage and no one seemed to notice. Now, when people were saying that you can change the focus in post, I was mind blown. I was like, what do you mean you can change the focus point in post? The amount of information, the amount of multiple focus points you'd need to have, that's absolutely incredible. The amount of processing, the amount of space that would require, I had no idea how Apple was going to pull this off. But That's not actually the case. What actually is going on when you change the focus in post is just dictating what you want blurred out. Because the iPhone maps everything, it can tell what subject is what. So you just select what you want it to blur out, and it does the fake Gaussian blur kind of effect on whatever you tap on. So you're not actually changing focus, you're just dictating what you want blurred or not blurred. You can also change the amount of blur in post. I usually keep it between f2 and f2.8 because that looks good. And honestly, if you're going anything above that, why not just use the regular cameras? And I'm going to find myself using the regular cameras and not cinematic mode much more often because it's much higher quality and you can shoot in 4K. I was showing these shots to the model I shot with, and honestly, we were both impressed. I think the thing that impressed me the most was when I zoomed in on her face by physically moving closer, and the bokeh in the background changed, just like it would on a professional cinema camera. This is really cool tech, but it's definitely not perfect and definitely not ready for prime time. You can still very much tell that it was shot on a phone, and there's this fake effect going on. I do, however, think it is much more than just a gimmick. It's wildly impressive that you can get that kind of performance out of a phone, and the technology is only going to get better and better with time. When portrait mode first came out to the iPhone in photos, it wasn't good. We could all tell that it was fake. But now, if you look at it, it's doing a really good job, and it's convincing way more people that it's a professional camera than it used to. You can now get something like this out of portrait mode, which is able to fool most people. It's only a matter of time before we see that same kind of performance come to the video side of things. Apple also showed off ProRes at their keynote, but it's not currently available and will be arriving in a future update. If you want to shoot ProRes 4K, you need a minimum of 256 gigabytes. The 128 gigabyte version either is limited by space because you're getting 6 gigabytes per minute on ProRes, which is a lot, so you'll just chew through all your data, but also it could be that the lower end iPhones use a slower SSD for that lower tier, and it just might not be able to keep up with the write speeds of ProRes. So we don't know what the reason is, but if you want to shoot 4K ProRes, you definitely want a minimum of 256. The other issue with ProRes on an iPhone is that you have these massive files. Like I said, 6 gigabytes per minute. So if you shoot 10 minutes, that's 60 gigabytes. And then you have to offload that presumably somewhere to edit it like a computer. You're gonna airdrop 60 gigabytes or you're gonna use the Lightning port USB 2 speeds. That's not great. So Apple needs to kind of fix that because from a workflow perspective, that doesn't make any sense. But when ProRes does drop for the iPhone, I will be doing a full video on that, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. So, overall, new chip, better battery life, beautiful new screen, best cameras on the market. For an iterative upgrade, this is actually hitting all the notes that most people care about, and they do it really, really well. But I want to know what you guys think. Are you excited about the iPhone 13 Pro Max? Are you going to be getting one? Are you on the fence? Are you waiting for the iPhone 14? What are your thoughts on cinematic mode? Let me know in the comment section down below. My name is Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.